It's less about saying orgasms can cure everything. Certainly that's not what I'm saying here. And it's more around, hey, this is such a fundamental piece in the longevity space that I think it just needs to have a voice in the same way that intermittent fasting or all the other things have a voice, as bringing this into part of our overall self-care, practice.
If you want to live like you matter, ditch the pills, look great, and feel freaking amazing, you're in the right place. I'm Dr. Wendy Trudeau.
And I'm Dr. Ed Levitan. Welcome to the Feel Freaking Amazing podcast,
where we empower you to live a vibrant and healthy life by optimizing your structural, chemical, emotional, social, and spiritual lives.
Hold on to your hats.
Hello, and welcome to this episode of the Feel Freaking Amazing podcast. I'm Wendy Trudeau. Obviously, Ed's not with us today. And we have an amazing guest today, my friend and colleague, Dr. Diane Mueller. She is a board-certified sexologist. We're going to dive into what that means. And she has dual doctorates in both naturopathic medicine as well as acupuncture and oriental medicine. So in other words, she's really freaking cool. She's the founder of the sex education center, mylibidodoc.com, and hosts the Libido Lounge podcast, where she helps monogamous couples create more passion, desire, hotter sex, and better communication. Diane, welcome. I'm so happy to have you here.
Oh, Wendy, it's so good to be back with you. I'm so glad to be here today. Thank you.
All right, so let's pivot. Talk to me about the relationship between healthy sex and how long you live, longevity.
Well, it's really interesting, right? Because we see that oxytocin, our major hormone of orgasm, which a lot of people will talk about oxytocin from a standpoint of like cuddling. So some people know oxytocin as like, oh, the cuddle hormone. And I'm going to talk about, answer your question in a moment when I talk about all the things oxytocin does. But so people really understand pleasure and sex and oxytocin. Hugs will increase oxytocin in the blood 20 to 50%. Orgasms will increase oxytocin in the blood 200 to 500%.
Because you get more bang for your buck.
Right, way more bang for it. It's a lot of hugging to make up for that oxytocin, right? It's a lot to make up for that orgasm. So way more efficient, and as one of my core values, efficiency is, it's like, I like things that are going to really, really work. And so oxytocin, we see it does so many different things. It is a cardiovascular protective effect. So it increases something in our body called nitric oxide synthase, which is the enzyme that makes more nitric oxide, which then leads to our blood vessels dilating, and so it leads to this lowering of blood pressure. We see it has like a cardioprotective effect on the heart muscle itself and the cells of the heart. We see that it has an anti-inflammatory effect. We see that it has an anxiolytic, so it lowers anxiety, it lowers depression. It actually resets and can help to reset the HPA axis. So when people are, using all the buzzwords around adrenal fatigue and cortisol problems, cortisol imbalances, oxytocin can really reset that. So as we change all of these things that are associated with more disease and the body not functioning as well, and we use oxytocin to bring some of those things back in balance, it's easy to see how this can be related to longevity and health.
My kids said to me last night at the dinner table that thank God I wasn't more popular because I would be canceled because I come out with the rudest things. And I was like, well, then that's a good thing. I'll try not to be more popular. But I'm thinking it's so pejorative to say oh, you just need a good orgasm. Do you know what I mean? It sounds like, how many women are just told oh, there's nothing wrong with you, honey. You just need to have some sex. That sounds really pejorative. But on the other hand, the data suggests that there's something to that.
Well, in my mind, I think it's like anything, right? We can easily hear this and we can reduce it down to everybody just needs more sex. And so I think your point is really important, right? I'm not by any means saying hey, orgasms are going to cure everything, right? That's not what we're saying here at all. It's more around one of my biggest points in the longevity space is, in the longevity space, we're talking about so many great things, right? We're talking about powers of intermittent fasting. We're talking about the cleanliness of food. We're talking about, how much movement we need with muscle building, on and on and on. Methylene blues into play, peptides, right? So there's so many things that are coming up in the longevity space. So my point is not reducing it down to, hey, everybody just have more orgasms. By no means am I saying they are the cure-all. but it's more around realizing that there's so many health benefits that can actually come from this. And oftentimes, I think people, when it comes to anything pleasure, we are oftentimes really thinking like, well, this is like hedonistic, and hedonistic, this pursuit of pleasure, I think has this real negative connotation versus this concept of healthy hedonism that I first heard from Dr. Nan Wise, which is really around, hey, pleasure actually has a point. And just like anything else in the self-care world around, we take care of ourselves more and we have more to give to the world, right? We have more to give to our children, to our partner, to our work, to our career, all these things. It's less about saying orgasms can cure everything. Certainly that's not what I'm saying here. And it's more around, hey, this is such a fundamental piece in the longevity space that I think it just needs to have a voice in the same way that intermittent fasting or all the other things have a voice, as bringing this into part of our overall self-care, practice.
That's fair. I have two questions for you that kind of came up as you were talking, because my brain is all over the place. One is, do you need to be partnered? Because part of your bio is about monogamous couples, but when we're looking at the effects of an orgasm, you don't need a partner to have an orgasm. Is the partner part required or just helpful, or neither?
I don't see anything. I've not seen anything from a study perspective that's really saying one versus the other, right? So it's from a standpoint of truly a research-based standpoint. From what I've seen, there hasn't been a good study that's like, hey, this is what happens orgasm with a partner. This is what happens orgasm with a self, right? So in my mind, orgasm could just be orgasm, but it is an area where I do think we need more research, truthfully. And when it comes to my work, it's more around, like, my work in part is around, hey, helping people, longevity wise, but my work is really also helping people that are at that point where it's like, they love their partner, they've been with their partner for a while, and they become roommates and best friends, and they're kind of losing some of that passion and that connection. And it creates, in many scenarios, this underlying stress in relationships. So a lot of the work on, monogamous couples is really about, hey, let's look at all of these different things that can help the relationship be stronger so that people ultimately can have more passion, but also just better relationships, better connection, happier relationships, right? But from the true orgasm oxytocin thing, I mean, like I said, I don't think there's a specific study, at least none that I've seen, that have looked at that. But I do think there are so many benefits out of masturbation and self-pleasure, and perhaps the same level. Yeah.
It's funny because they've studied women who have been partnered for a period of time and found that the number one thing to improve a woman's sex drive is novelty, i.e. a new partner.
Yeah.
But for people who are in long-term monogamous committed relationship, that's not an option. So let's back up. Talk to me about, what are the things that cause someone's sex drive to decline, other than just you're bored, right? You're like, oh, I know what's going to happen here. I've read this book 16 times, 20,000 times. Other than just kind of same old, what are the things that decline our sex drive over as we age?
Yeah, I mean, few different thoughts, right? So it's like we have all the physical side of things. So the things that we look at in functional medicine that I know both of us look at a lot in our one-on-one practices, anything from cardiovascular health to hormonal health to pelvic floor issues to neurological problems, stress, inflammation, toxins, stealth infections, right? So, we have these major functional medicine root causes. Obviously, the boredom, but one of the key things that I think is super important to mention that is revolutionary for a lot of people when I talk about it is men and women, the way we are wired is that men have desire first and then arousal, and women have arousal first and then desire. And what the difference is desire is of the mind, arousal is of the body. So desire is like, okay, like in a hetero relationship, man sees a woman and his wife, partner, person on the street walk by, it's a thought around their physique. And then all of a sudden, so that's in the mind, that's desire. And then all of a sudden they get turned on, they get a hard on, that sort of thing. That's in the body, that's arousal. And women do oftentimes work that way early on in that new relationship energy, but 6 to 18 months when the new relationship energy tends to fizzle, for most women, it tends to shift. And it tends to be arousal is before desire. So what this means for most women, and this happens a lot as the relationship goes on, and so a lot more with age, is that we think as women that, okay, well, I'm not in the mood. Like, I'm so stressed out. Work has been hard. I got 16,000 things to do. I got to take the kids up. I got to get the kids early in the morning. It's already 11 at night. And we're like, there's no way there's space for that desire in the mind. So for many women, what will happen is when they decide to start having sex, oftentimes when they're not even in the mood, 15 to 20 minutes in, all of a sudden, hey, because now they've dropped into their body. Now they're feeling the sensations of the body. Now they're feeling aroused. And this is when the thought goes back up to the brain that says desire. And all of a sudden there's a thought that's like, this is actually feeling really good. And this is why at the end, it's very common for her to say something to her partner like, that was really great. Why don't we do that more often? Right?
Right.
So some of the low desire in part is that we're just not taught about the difference of these arousal cycles. Like, I certainly wasn't taught about this in any of my medical education programs, and most people I've talked to have not been either. So that low desire is just coming from, hey, we don't understand oftentimes as women that it's arousal first. And so that means in order to get the desire, this is why it can be really helpful to start at like 20 minutes of sensual massage with like taking sex off the table and just like practice getting into one's body. Because once you're feeling the sensations of the body, that can lead to the arousal, and then the desire can come secondly.
I think this is great, Diane. I think the other thing we want to highlight is, I always say to my patients, do you get into it? Like, great, you don't have a great desire, but can you get into it once you start fooling around with your partner? Can you get into it? And if the answer is yes, I'm happy. If the answer is no, I want to explore more. And then my next question is always, are you able to orgasm at some point in the process? Because I'm looking for, are you intact neurologically, right? Because if you cannot have an orgasm, and orgasm is such a broad term. So it doesn't always look like in When Harry Met Sally, when she's in the restaurant and she has this like crescendo and it's amazing. Sometimes it's a quieter response for women, but that you want to feel at the end of it, like something was satisfying. It was good for you and you feel satisfied, right? Like that you notice that you feel a different sense of desire at the end than you did at the beginning.
Yeah, and what's interesting too about that is like oxytocin, pleasure, actually stimulates more pleasure. So like most of the feedback loops, the neurological, the hormonal feedback loops in our body are on negative feedback loops. And so for your listeners, I'll explain what that means, which is like if the brain is stimulating to the thyroid to secrete more thyroid, and there's enough thyroid in the body, the thyroid levels go up, then there's a signal back to the brain that says, stop sending me the signal, I'm good, right? So, you and I both know that's called negative feedback. But what's interesting with oxytocin and pleasure, it's actually on a positive feedback loop. So when the brain secretes oxytocin and the oxytocin goes up in the body, what winds up happening is the body's like, well, this is really good. It sends a signal to the brain that says, I want more. Right. So you're totally right on in these questions. And in my opinion around, hey, if somebody is not experiencing that orgasm, which if anybody is listening to this and is not, everybody can. So I always like people to know, like, just because you haven't had an orgasm or you haven't had one for a long time, it doesn't mean you're broken. It just means there's something out of balance that needs to be brought back into balance. And so with that, we see once we do things like erotic recovery and orgasm training and that sort of thing, that once that pleasure kicks in, what tends to happen is people tend to want more of it because oxytocin is going to lead to the desire for more oxytocin.
I always joke with my patients who are talking about abstinence. I'm like, abstinence always fails eventually. It always eventually is a failure, right? Okay, let's talk about adrenal health and desire, because my firm belief is if you're tapped out, it occurs more like a burden than a pleasure. And it's either sex or stress. You can't often have both. So what role, well, I guess I just answered it, but talk to me about what you've seen with adrenal health and libido.
What's interesting is, so in some of the work of Dr. Emily Nagoski, she really goes into this concept. And what she has found in some of her work is that stress has a two-part reaction for people on sex. So for some people, that stress, that adrenal, burnout kind of scenario can actually lead to an accelerator for libido. So there are people that the more stress, the more burnout they have, the more they are actually craving sex. Now, what I have found in my work is that while that can be true, that at least statistically from what I've seen, seems to be a much more of the minority of people, but I like to at least name that is possible. So there are some people that can have that happen. I think for most people, it's really what you're talking about here, which she's seeing, with Dr. Emily Nagoski's seeing in her work, is around the issue being more of like a break in the desire. And some of this exactly what you're saying. It's like with the overwhelm, with the stress, it's almost like there's just this thing of, hey, this is just an extra thing to do. And that's where I really get into talking to people about, the prioritization of it and the scheduling of it. Like an exercise I love to give couples is to have them make a value list of all the things they value in their life, right? Their relationship, their work, their kids, their house, yada, 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 and kind of put it in order. And then to make a pie chart with 24 pieces of pie representing the 24 hours of the day. And then you're going to write in each of those, pies, like what you're doing on average. So, 7 to 9 of those, pies, those slices, you're probably going to be sleeping, hopefully. And what's interesting is how many people, when they do this, have their relationship at the very top or, real close to the top. And there's not even a slice of pie for them on an average day. And I think that's innately part of the problem, is just like we do everything else around like, okay, here's when I'm going to take my kids to school, and here's when I'm going to take myself to the gym, and here's when I'm going to go get the groceries, here's when I'm going to work. And so everything else in our life has a spot. Well, it's easy to see that if we don't have a spot for our intimate life, even if it's just once a week, that things are going to, oftentimes like fade. So the first step oftentimes is like looking at this pie and saying, doing this awareness exercise of where is our time actually matching our values? And if it's not, then I think it's a good soul searching exercise on what do we really want to reprioritize, even in an overwhelmed scenario, because if we don't have space and time for that partner, what is going to happen to that relationship over time?
Yeah, I remember Ed talks about this old Native American story about, there's an evil, I'm going to totally massacre the story, but there's like an evil wolf and a healthy and a good wolf, an angelic wolf, and which one is going to grow? And it's really the one you feed. So when you look at your relationship, the way you feed it is the way it's going to look. So it's important to prioritize it.
Exactly. And people sometimes resist. Like when I say, oh, start scheduling sex and start scheduling intimacy, it's really like it's people like, well, I don't want to do that. It's not hot if it's not spontaneous. But the argument that I give over and over for that is if we go back to like the new relationship energy when people are dating, what a lot of people don't realize in the relationship in the beginning is that everybody was scheduling it. It's like, oh, we finally have our third date on Tuesday and we get ourselves super gussied up and are we going to make out or are we going to do this? And then we have another date and are we going to have sex for the first time? And so oftentimes in the beginning, because we're not seeing this person all the time, anytime we see them, we are orienting to, oh, we are likely going to engage in some intimate or pleasure-filled activity. We're getting our mind around it. We're making space for it. And in many ways, we're really scheduling it. It's on the calendar as like this special date, right? And so it's only when we combine our households, we combine our schedules, we combine our lives, that most people stop scheduling it. And then we don't want to schedule it because it feels like, hey, this isn't sexy, this isn't spontaneous. But the fact of the matter is, back when things were in that new relationship energy, we were actually scheduling it. So it's just a reorientation there for people of like, this can still be scheduled and still be incredibly hot.
I mean, I schedule going to the gym. It's in my schedule. I go to a trainer and I love the outcome. And so it feels very similar, right? That we can schedule sex as a thing that we need to pay attention to. And we might not feel like it, but we're always happy we did it at the end.
Exactly. And that's a lot of it too. And like erotic recovery and like the sex therapy world, that's something that's talked about a lot, is like, especially if people haven't had sex in a while, of like starting with intimate dates where it is just about massage and touch and kind of this erotic feeling without going into sex, without going into orgasms. And the idea is like, you show up kind of whether you feel like it or not. And just like you said, it's the gym or it's anything else. And if we don't make space for it, it is just going to fall away. So we have to make the space and just show up, just like putting on our gym shoes and going to the gym when we're just not in the mood. But like you said at the end, it's like, then you feel great. And then you're so glad you did it. And all the other things benefit from it. And I think we just haven't prioritized it so much in our conversation. So it doesn't get prioritized in our relationships without talking about it.
Right. Can you talk a little about women in midlife and how hormone balance influences sexual desire and overall vitality and response and connection?
Yeah, there's a real direct relationship with estrogen and testosterone, in particular with everything we're talking about here. So, for example, estrogen will increase the number of oxytocin receptors. So basically, because of that, with the more receptors, oxytocin can have a better response on the body. So when we get to midlife, when we get to perimenopause and menopause, and we start to see those estrogen levels fall, oftentimes we can see those oxytocin levels, or at least the oxytocin responsiveness, fall. So it's thought that some of like the anxiety, for example, that can happen to many women around midlife, that oftentimes people just attribute to things like hormone imbalance, is not just due to the decline in things like estrogen, but it's actually due to the decline in functioning of things like oxytocin. So I really feel like at midlife, with everything going on with that decline in estrogen, the decline in progesterone, the decline in testosterone, there's a lot to be said around, hey, we're doing all this great BHRT, in functional medicine to help women of this age. But I think in addition to things like pleasure-filled activities, I do think there needs to be more conversation around what happens if we also add in things like intranasal oxytocin because of this decline on that and the resultant changes we see on cardiovascular health. Like that's another thing, right? With age and menopause, there's this concern of like estrogen's positive impact on the heart and the cardiovascular system. So as estrogen declines, we see that, that negative impact, but oxytocin, remember, is declining there too. And that also is cardioprotective. So I think it's like a missing component in this overarching, like hormones are falling type of scenario that happens at midlife is really the oxytocin component as well.
Talk to me about, please, methylene blue and oxytocin. I'm assuming these are both compounded?
Both compounded. Yeah. Methylene blue, I love. Methylene blue I take often, not quite every day, but almost every day. And one of the things it helps to do is bring more oxygen to the cells. So it's been studied for things like neurodegenerative diseases. I've used it a lot clinically to help people with energy. It can help with fatigue a lot. And so what it essentially is a dye. And when you take it, usually starting around 5 milligrams, sometimes working up all the way to 50 milligrams a day, it does all the things I mentioned. Now, it's really important because there's a lot of places online where you can just go buy methylene blue direct to consumer. But there is a genetic abnormality called a G6PD dysfunction. And if you have this G6PD dysfunction, you really want to test for it, because if you have it and you take methylene blue, it could actually lead to a very, very quick anemia that you could actually end up in the hospital over. So you do want to make sure that you're testing for that deficiency. Oxytocin oftentimes is delivered intranasally. So both of these things.
Wait, sorry. Diane,
Yeah.
before we go off that, when you have the methylene blue, if you have the G6PD deficiency, so we measure G6PD for IVs, and people can generally get, 10 to 15 grams and they're fine. We just don't do the high dose IVs. Is that similar for methylene blue, that people can tolerate a lower dose on that spectrum, but they shouldn't be at the 50 milligrams, or is it that they just really shouldn't take it at all?
Honestly, I feel like it's a gray zone with what I've seen. I don't think it's like, unless I'm missing a paper out there, I haven't seen anything around like where is the statistical problem at 5 milligrams versus 50. I think in the lower doses, you probably are a lot safer. It's probably why a lot of these places are selling it online. But I do think it's a point of caution around, hey, something like this could happen. I certainly would never do anything like a high loading dose of 50. I still test all my patients for it before putting them on, just out of safety. But I haven't seen anything truthfully that's been like clear around like, hey, where is the risk tolerance statistically speaking at 5, versus 50?
I was trained in methylene blue as an OBGYN because if a woman came in and thought she ruptured her membranes, we would insert methylene blue into the uterus and then just stick a tampon in to see, does it turn blue? Because if she ruptured her membranes, it turns blue. And if it doesn't, she'll just pee it out. And that was how, so when methylene blue came on the scene, I was like, oh, I've known about that for years, but not from an anti-inflammatory standpoint. It was literally just an OBGYN trick.
That's it's so interesting. I did not heard that. Very interesting. And so were you testing people for G6PD back then? No.
No, because they weren't taking it IV. It was going into the amniotic fluid when they were it was going into the uterine, into the uterus. So it was never getting systemic. It was in the uterus, and that's a closed system essentially.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, it's a fun use.
Okay, so then going back to the oxytocin, the nasal administration, how are you dosing that?
So usually starting around 20 IUs a day, but 20 to 40 IUs is where I've seen to be kind of the sweet spot with that. And the cool thing about oxytocin and its use, methylene blue too, is they really can be used as needed. So because of that, it can be a really helpful thing to have around, especially in the conversations around stress and HPA access and showing up for your partner and just living a more balanced life. You're having a stressful day, you get home and you want to be present with your partner, your kids, etc. And you can use it as needed where oh, wow, I need to have that stress reduction right now. It can be administered just that way. And you don't have to worry about, well, if you're not taking it the next day, there being any sort of problem. Yeah.
Will it raise your sex drive or more raise your ability to be present?
I've seen, clinically what I've seen, we can go clinically or theoretically, right? Because anytime we increase oxytocin, potentially, it could lead to increasing sex drive. I haven't seen really any of that, truthfully, in my use of it. More what I've seen, and when I say my use, I mean personally and professionally, what I've seen more is the ability to be present, the ability to be calm, which then, of course, could lead people to be more open to okay, let's get in bed and let's try this. But it's from what I've seen in my use, it's been more the ability to be present and calm. Have you seen anything different in your clinic?
I haven't used intranasal oxytocin.
Okay.
So I can't comment on it.
Yeah. Uh-huh. Yeah, it's a fun tool, but from a standpoint of sex drive, it's going to be way less of a punch than putting somebody on a higher dose of testosterone, for example, from an immediate clinical result in most cases.
Got it. Any downsides to it?
Not that I've seen. I've seen no side effects.
Can we talk about some simple daily habits that our listeners can implement to feel more energized and more connected sexually?
Yeah. The way I like to say it is that the practice of pleasure is deeply connected to the practice of presence, right? So it's anytime, a real easy thing for people to understand is thinking about food. And I'm sure everybody can think of times, probably many, where they have sat down for a meal and 2 seconds later they look at it and they're like, wait, where'd it go? Right? So it's we're not experiencing presence in that moment. We're just going through the motion, shoveling the food versus a present way of eating, which is I'm going to take a bite. I'm going to put my fork down. I'm going to taste all the flavors. Well, in doing that, in tasting all the flavors, we're actually practicing pleasure. We're practicing the ability of our sensations to deeply enjoy the moment in the meal. So it's that real connection, right? And the pleasure in my mind is one of my favorite mindfulness types of practices, right? Because it is truly mindful. We can't truly, deeply enjoy pleasure without being mindful to the sounds, to the tastes, to the smells, to the tactile sensations. All of that we really need to be present for. And so with a pleasure practice, it can start very simply as a pleasure presence practice of saying, okay, well, I'm going to take a moment when I get my coffee in the morning and maybe I have to go run around, but I'm going to start a habit of, setting the clock and spending 1 to 3 minutes, just taking a few sips, sitting down and actually enjoying the flavor of it versus running around. And obviously this is said cautiously, right? Because I know people have so many things going on. But the question is like, when in the day can you actually, in the normal things you're doing, drinking coffee, lifting weights, like we can turn the gym into a pleasure practice, right? We can basically lift weights, for example, in a way where we're like, okay, let me deeply feel into my muscles. And, it's like pleasure pain, of course, in this scenario, right? But let me actually deeply feel into what my body feels like to move so correctly with this movement. And that can actually bring a lot of pleasure. So one of the initial conversations with like kind of habit stacking without adding more is saying, what am I doing anyways that I can take, like I can have cues and reminders, sticky notes, alarms on my phone, notes around my house, notes in my car to actually remind me to say, hey, the first like 1 to 2 minutes, 1 to 5 minutes of this activity, I'm really going to focus on the sensation. So I'm practicing the pleasure. And then, the more we practice it outside of the bedroom, the more we can bring it in, but they really do reflect on each other, the inside the bedroom and the outside of the bedroom.
So really slowing down, get present, be focused, and try not to multitask and run through your day to get to the end of it.
Correct. Yeah, correct. And obviously we're going to do that some as humans in our super busy, first world lives. But the more we can actually implement moments where we're not, just like, a visualization practice, just like a yoga practice, just like a meditation practice. It's just a different version of that, of really saying coming to the center. And then similarly on date night, scheduling a date night once a week, couple times a month, if that's all you can do. And have the first like 5 or 10 minutes just on some sort of like non-sexual pleasure practice, just holding hands, looking each other's eyes, rubbing each other's bodies, just really being present to the sensations without an agenda of, needing it to lead to a certain thing can be really helpful too.
So being connected to your partner.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
This is cool, Diane. Where can people find out more about you? And we'll put everything in the show notes. Like we'll have it in writing.
So one of the things I want to bring up is you mentioned novelty earlier, and novelty being a huge part of how couples get out of boredom. So I have a whole checklist of different ideas for people to bring novelty into their long-term monogamous partnerships, totally for free. So people can download that for ideas at mysexdoc.com. So that's a really great place to get started, mysexdoc.com. And then another free gift for your listeners is if they go to libidoquiz.com. So on libidoquiz.com, if they take the quiz, then they will get answers of some of the likely root causes of their low libido from a physical perspective, as well as lab tests to make sure they're asking their doctor for, because as we know, sometimes doctors run very superficial lab tests. So the point of this is like to help people advocate for themselves to get the right tests from their doctors and complete tests. So that's at libidoquiz.com. So, and those are the best places to get started. Yeah.
Okay. And then mylibidodoc.com is also your site, right?
Correct. Yep, exactly.
All right. This is awesome. And I think the thing that you really highlighted also is you should be talking to your doctor about this.
Yes.
This is like, actually bring it up because your doctor can't fix something that they don't know about.
Yeah. I read a survey the other day, and I have no idea how accurate the survey is. So I say that cautiously because I don't know where people are getting these things from. But I did read a survey that said 72% of people want to talk to their doctor about sex and don't. So, I don't know for sure if that stat is accurate, but what it does tell me and what I feel is true is a lot of people really are dying for somebody to talk to about this, but they don't know who to go to. And I do think it's a very important thing to have these kind of conversations. So thank you for, letting me speak today, because it's just, low sex drive, low libido, any issues here are just another imbalance in the body. It's really another imbalance in the body, another imbalance in the relationship. And we really need to get the taboo off of it.
And it's fixable. I think that's the most important thing to remember is it is fixable.
It is, but not if we don't do anything and not if we don't say anything. Actionable.
All right, Diane, this has been great. Thank you for joining us for this episode of the Feel Freaking Amazing podcast. For the listeners, this is Diane Mueller. She's a board-certified sexologist, and you can find her at mylibidodoc.com. And Diane, really, thanks for being here.
Thanks, Wendy. Thanks, everybody.
Don't go it alone.
It's not a social journey until others join.
Share this with your friends.